Welcome everyone to the Orcoro Circus. I am your ringmaster for the evening, the Hipster Snek, and this is the black sheep of the PS2 Monster Rancher trilogy, the bizarrely titled Monster Rancher EVO. Titled simply Monster Farm 5 in Japan, Tecmo decided to make a game that played and flowed more like a traditional RPG that happened to have some monster game elements included. They also chose to focus far more on human characters than the monsters, to mixed results, and by extension completely changed the gameplay engine from anything we'd seen previously. They also decided to translate the entire game script via Babelfish for some reason. Wait, is Babelfish still a thing? I didn't just date myself with that joke. Hang on a second. Oh yeah, there it is. Man, I'm getting old. Immediately, we see another art shift, but this time it's sort of an in-between, between 3 and 4 styles, where it relies heavily on that cel-shaded style, but it has enough shadows to make it look really stylized. It's actually rather vivid, and it gives a good, high-contrast color scheme to the world. It's a great approach to making a circus look alive and energetic. Though there are more than a few areas in the game that are poorly lit, and due to advent of flat-screen TVs during that time, it can become difficult to traverse depending on your setup. But generally speaking, the look works in the game's favor. I'll be honest though, I still think 4's designs just work better for the world of Monster Rancher as a whole. And if Monster Rancher DS is any indication, it seems like Tecmo agrees with me. In terms of the sound design, this is probably the best soundtrack the series has ever had. I tip my hat into the sound team as they've really outdone themselves. The training and showtime theme in particular, which you'll hear a lot obviously, is an earworm, and the music in the various adventure fields really suit the ambient moods they're trying to set. I've always liked Monster Rancher's music, but this one is up and away the best it's yet had. Simple as that. The story is, as I mentioned, structured more like a traditional RPG storyline, something that works both for and against the game as a whole. You play as Julio, who never actually gets a backstory other than he was an orphan as a child and taken into the Orcoro Circus, run by Albert, the gentlemanly clown and ringmaster. There's Godfrey, who sometimes speaks like the Hulk and other times speaks perfectly normally and likes tank monsters, Marlene the belly dancer, who likes intelligence monsters and mocking the player, and few others who end up joining as the game progresses. The game runs 7 chapters, each set in a different town, whereupon we meet different characters who mostly aren't terribly interesting, but they get the plot rolling to the next dungeon. I'll come back and talk more about the plot shortly, but let's hit the gameplay next. The gameplay is complicated to comment on because frankly it doesn't even make sense in context. Basically, you start the game off with a new monster, Piroro, given to you by Nayuta, a shrine maiden of the Tochika who are somehow still around, never mind them dying out in ancient times, I guess? Anyway, you're allowed the same number of monsters as there are hands to raise them, starting with 3, maximum of 5 by the story's end, and you train them by, well, doing nothing. By default, the calendar is set to train/rest, and the monster handler of each respective critter does all the work, including deciding how often to give them breaks. Somehow we ended up going from the most hands-on Monster Rancher to the least, and that's actually kind of an enormous letdown. In that same vein, you can change the training style of the handler in question, but in a few game weeks it ends up snapping back to whatever their default is, and really I can't even recommend messing with it. To give an example, one time, due to seeing a monster with the same personality type as another doing really well under a harsher training style, I changed the raising style of another handler to the same. A few weeks later, I received the less than helpful, "Your monster is retired, it has a sick" message. Never mind the English, but retire in Monster Rancher typically has slightly more permanent connotations, and you might understand why I gasped for air the moment I read that message. It actually took me a moment to parse that it was just a really weird way of saying the monster was temporarily out of commission and wasn't suddenly at room temperature. Thank goodness death isn't a mechanic in this game, or that would have legitimately scared me. You see, when the monsters do train, they build up motivation. When the motivation bar is completely filled, any additional training is just a waste of time and energy. So next you have to put on a show. You are a circus, after all. Monsters can train doing a performance, which is absolutely garbage, or using training gadgets which double as props in the circus acts, and once you actually get them, you should literally use nothing else. Actually, training with balance is kind of a crapshoot, because swapping these gadgets tanks your motivation to 0. It's easier to just keep one monster on one gadget its entire life and avoid having to deal with the lull in the schedule. And since all gadgets raise all stats at least a little bit, there's no real incentive to shuffle them around. The strange handler-monster pairing system discourages that style of play anyway. You're just going to need to accept that all your monsters will be masters of one or two things and be terrible at everything else. And funny enough, that will actually play to your advantage, for reasons I'll cover here in a sec. But let's talk about the actual circus show next. Shows happen with Julio placed in the center stage. Each monster and act will be represented by a large clown-face device called an Orcoro egg. To get the most out of them, you'll want to start from green, then move to yellow, and then to red. You activate each in order to participate in the completely incongruous and unwelcome timing rhythm game that suddenly shows up. Yeah, let's talk about this because this is going to be the deciding factor upon whether you'll enjoy the game for the all-around okay game that it can be, or it will make you hate it with every fiber of your being. Green eggs, or first level gadgets and performances, make you do a timing/slider puzzle to match colored tokens. Yellow eggs, second level gadgets, have you do a shooting gallery game where you need to shoot the next color token in sequence. Lastly, red eggs, or third level games, have you do a button input sequence which paradoxically feels like it's the easiest of the minigames to actually perform. Now, think about what I just got done saying and tell me, did I just describe a sequel to Monster Rancher or to Dance Dance Revolution? Yeah, it's a make or break sequence that will ultimately decide your success in a monster sim RPG based on mechanics of a music and rhythm game. Does that make any sense at all? No? Okay, good, then we're on the same page. Okay, now that training is completely impenetrable, let's talk about battles, as they show up fairly early even by Monster Rancher standards. Battles had to be retooled, as now every battle is handled in a 3 vs 3 fashion, rather than using 4's rather elegant rotation system. They decided to instead make battles really dull. All attacks are now ranged to near or far distance, and monsters who meet directly face to face will lock together unless you partake in a button mashing minigame that the AI is too dumb to understand. While I'm sure this was supposed to be strategic, it leads to the game's utmost Achilles heel. Just get a monster, like, for example, the Maya the game just gives you upon clearing Chapter 1, and train it in literally nothing but speed for its entire life. And stats now cap at 2,000, so getting her speed well over 1,000 before the story's out is easier than it really should be. Now, lock her into near range with the enemy team. Keep 2 monsters in the back, one who trains in nothing but accuracy and the other in nothing but power or intelligence, and just keep attacking at distance until you win. The computer can literally do nothing to stop this strategy, and it works on every encounter, regular and boss alike. Congrats, you've effectively beaten the game, assuming your mad DDR skills are up to snuff. And lastly, this leads to adventures, as you might well have guessed. The biggest difference this time is that they're not fun. In fact, they feel very much like formalities. Every adventure is chapter and region specific, and all follow essentially a straight line to the end with some stray monsters along a formula. You see, the stray monsters are all going to be scaled to where the game thinks you should be stat-wise, meaning that most of them are just pitifully weak once you have a meaningful head of steam behind you, and you also don't recover HP while on adventures like you do in Monster Rancher 4, meaning that these are either going to be laughably easy or incredibly and frustratingly difficult for you. Now, there are upsides to this. You get anima points whenever you defeat stray monsters, which you can then spend on your monster to buy traits and additional attacks. You can also spend 100 anima points to get some weird button-mashing big bang attack, but just don't. It is completely worthless, especially if you're already using the dominant strategy that I've already described. The anima point system at first will be really expensive and clunky, but as you get further into the game, you'll end up having so much of this stuff that you'll hardly know what to do with it. You'll min-max all your traits and attacks in no time. The system honestly feels like it would be better for a Monster Rancher tabletop game, which, by the way, Tecmo, I wholeheartedly endorse. But as a mechanic in a single-player JRPG, it just feels a little bit flat and boring after the adventure system used in Monster Rancher 4. Okay, back on track now. There are things that you'll find that unlock additional monster breeds in these adventures, but they too are really treated as formalities. They're unavoidable, you'll never miss them. You're just pushed along the linear path, and they aren't hidden or locked behind clever puzzles either. In fact, there are no clever puzzles. Most of the puzzles in the game are having your monster push blocks around, because unlike Monster Rancher 4, which embraced monsters having different specialties, every adventure has to be beatable with every monster in the game, so EVO just makes them all boring. The closest thing to genuinely entertaining adventures that these get is Chapter 3, Kingdom Capital Campana. Funny enough, Campana also has the best supporting cast of any chapter either. Maybe the entire game should have just taken place there. And these systems really aren't helped by the fact that they attempted to completely retool the item system and instead made it a cluttered waste of futility. Items bought at the shops, apart from training gadgets, are all worthless. They don't do anything except waste your money. Half the treasure chests in the game contain vendor trash and the other half contain the hidden monster Jack in the Cho, which paradoxically are scaled to the stats you're actually at, and thus tend to be stronger than the normal monsters. So forget it, just ignore all the chests, they're worthless. Honestly, items in EVO on the whole are all worthless. At best, the items you'll find are going to be vendor trash. They even try to make this item combining gimmick, but unless your vendor trash is uncommonly good, which is practically never, you'll just get vendor trash that sells for less than the components would have. In the event you do somehow get uncommonly good vendor trash, it might make an accessory. That's an item a monster can equip while on expedition. But they barely do anything. Their impacts are so inconsequential they might as well rename them James Cameron's Avatar. Yeah, I said it. Monster battle me. And as I mentioned earlier, monsters in this game don't die. No, they didn't die per se in 4 either, but in this game it's almost kind of hilarious. After a certain point, yeah, they'll stop gaining stats, but you can keep using them in shows and battles and expeditions at no real cost. For those monsters you raised for several chapters that essentially have an unbreakable battle tactic and strong synergy, you never have to give them up. This makes the monsters even further distant from the rancher. Man, talk about an easy exploit. And lastly, this ties back into that thing about the story I was talking about earlier. What follows is kind of spoilery in its base nature, so jump ahead to the listed timestamp if you just want to get to my final thoughts. I'll give you a second to make up your mind. We good? Good. So anyway, we travel around as a traveling circus would to all these different locations, and pretty much from chapter 2 through chapter 6, it's pretty much the same chapter again. I don't mean this in the sense that they use the same themes and mechanics. All video games do that. I mean you're going to do precisely the same thing and see the same song and dance every time, and I don't mean your training gadgets. You'll arrive in a town, meet some NPC after a week or so, put on a show which wins all meaningful NPCs to your side, whereupon we learn that one or more of them are intimately related to a major character. After that, we learn that there's some reason we need to engage in a monster battle, just one, not a tournament, and that will lead into an adventure. If you enjoyed said adventure or thought it had a neat motif, you'll probably be forced through it 2 or 3 more times if you're in the latter half of the game. Also, puzzles and items don't reset, so that's some great drive to do it all over again. Shame all the puzzles disappear after Campana, but hey, who's counting? Certainly not this cynical Snek. After we adventure and have a boss fight that's ultimately defeated the same way as any other given fight, we move to the next town and gasp at how convenient it is that we know someone or have something that just opens all the doors to the city to us. The game has a habit of just going down the JRPG checklist of cliches. Tomboy princess? Check. Big dude who's actually a huge softie? Check. Cute animal mascot? Just gonna put a double check on that one. And then as we get into the endgame, the story just completely goes off the rails. It starts delving deep into anima as a story element, bringing weirdly shamanistic themes into a series that's never had them prior and will never have them again. It turns out that the bad guys live in a world called Warp. They're these weird half-human, half-monster hybrids who travel through time, and oh my god, there is no way this game is canon. We learn all this because of an exposition dump, girl, named Linka, who claims that she is the hope of all residents of the world of Warp, discarded and made into a person. It is every bit as crazy as I'm making it sound right now, and the game wants you to take it at face value. What a fever dream. At the end of the day, how does the game stack up? I mean, I've spent a lot of time in this video ragging on this game pretty mercilessly, but I'll be honest, I like it. I mean, I don't love it the way I love Monster Rancher 4, but I certainly would place it well above 3 in terms of its quality. For what it was an interesting experiment. Tecmo really isn't known for traditional JRPGs, and, well, this was a wild departure from what the precedent was. Yeah, it was a bold and risky move. They tried a lot of new things, so I kind of understand the EVO of the title. It was a big change from the status quo, clearly taking inspiration from some of the aspects found in 3 and 4. Maybe it's my inclination to go easy on it due to it being a Monster Rancher game, but I think that, overall, it's pretty okay. It's flawed, no doubt, but there are some really genuine character moments in the game, and hackneyed as some of it can be, there's a lot of good ideas hiding in the game. I think my complaints are valid, but I enjoy playing it. It's not my favorite, it never will be, but it's fun. I think the word for it is charming. And now, the curtain call. This has been the Hipster Snek. Please be sure to hit that like button every time, and feel free to leave a comment below on your thoughts on the game. Hit subscribe and the bell icon if you haven't already to help the channel grow. Or, if you're the sort to toss out some gold on the onstage performers, you can become a patron at my Subscribestar page, link in the description. And since we've been talking about evolving game mechanics so much, let's back it up 65 million years or so and talk about another game that's evolved from a lot of humble origins. I'll see you in Eden, dear viewers.